course will begin with an examination of really what is arguably the foundational symbolic place for Zionist culture, which is a site known as Tel Hai, Hilltop of Life, located in the Upper Galilee, far in Israel's north. And this site, Tel Hai, was the site of a battle between Zionist and Arab forces in 1920, which is really grows out of a context of a colonial war being conducted between France and its Arab opponents in that general area, Syria, down into the northern reaches of Palestine at the time. And in the context of that larger conflict, the four isolated Zionist settlements that existed in this territory at the time were subject to marauding and had to very carefully negotiate their place in this larger conflict. The battle that took place at Tel Hai, really it's unclear to this day what exactly prompted the opening of fire, but once it transpired, in the course of the battle, six of the Jewish inhabitants of the site were killed, which was a very large number at the time. And this skirmish, this battle, really represents the first formal. There had been earlier skirmishes, but this event really marked what at least has come to be seen as the first full-fledged battle between Zionist and Arab forces. So for that reason, it takes on a certain aura of mythology in Israeli collective memory, was especially important in the pre-state period. Now, from the perspective of today, or when we think of what warfare often entails, the magnitude of what happened, the events at Tel Hai, seemed to be actually quite modest. But what was important was this was a context in which you had a people who were trying, a movement that was trying to resettle, reclaim, revive its ancient homeland, a people that had not been used to fighting for themselves for centuries. And so here was a moment where instead of simply evacuating, instead of simply laying down arms and walking away, these settlers stood up for themselves. Now, ironically, and indeed there's not a small amount of irony in the actual historical situation of these symbolic places and spaces. So ironically, the settlement of Tel Hai ultimately was abandoned, and efforts to resettle the site never actually succeeded. And so all there is actually at Tel Hai all that takes place at Tel Hai today is a commemoration of the settlement that had existed and of the refusal of those settlers to simply walk away when things turned tough back then, even if ultimately they did turn away and there was no enduring settlement at the site. So there's quite a bit of irony there. Nonetheless, Tel Hai, again, took on this important place in Zionist mythology as in a way you could say, the place where where the diaspora Jew who had been passive and had not fought for himself for 2 millennia virtually picked up arms and started to fight for himself once again. And so the day of these events became the site of an annual pilgrimage to the site, or was in fact celebrated in schools all across the pre-state Yishuv, the Hebrew term for the pre-state Jewish community in Palestine, and later in the state of Israel. So the date became very important, and even if it's declined in importance in recent decades, Tel Hai still has that aura of a kind of foundational ethos, of a kind of starting point for the Zionist project, the Zionist revival, and indeed a telling testimony of its continued vitality as an idea, at least today, can be found in the fact that in 2010 the Israeli cabinet had met. The 2010 meeting of the Israeli cabinet took place on the site of Tel Hai, and it was during this meeting that the cabinet promulgated a list of sites of national heritage, 2 of which are actually found on the West Bank. Rachel's tomb, which is just outside of Bethlehem, and the cave of Machpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, which is in the center of Hebron. And that created quite a degree of controversy that the state of Israel included 2 sites that are not in its recognized territory on its list of national heritage sites. But what's of interest to me is that this declaration, at the meeting in which this list was released, took place at Tel Hai. So Tel Hai really can be seen as a kind of, as a kind of foundational place for thinking of symbolic sites, symbolic places and spaces in modern Israel, and therefore represents a really wonderful, really the ideal opening for the course as a whole.